Welcome back to Marketing is Mind Control, a podcast where nerds discuss marketing strategies through the frame of, is that ethical? Is that manipulation? What are the intentions behind that? Because once you see the manipulation, you can't unsee it, and that's what this whole thing is about. Waking up to the idea that we may have been lied to is difficult, but when you understand how and why that happens, it's empowering and easier to take back control of your decisions. Financially, can you afford to be manipulated into buying things you don't need or stories you don't need to support? This podcast isn't about shaming any brand or creator or concept, but shedding light on topics we should be able to talk about. Thanks for being here.
Bryce Taylor. Do we want to just discuss how important her story was and the implications like you were talking about?
Yeah, we could talk about it. I mean, we could maybe talk about we could talk about anything about it, but with her, I think it's like the interesting things are probably, who she is and where she kind of sits in with things like, MK Ultra, Monarch, like different things like that, even things like Satanic Panic and Disclosures, to Kathy O'Brien and then other whistleblowers, and then to like the project itself, which is, which is what's behind me, but what she wrote and then talked about for a while. And then she's pretty much been out of the public for about 25 years.
It's been that long.
Yeah, like just after, I think 2000.
Right about when Kathy O'Brien went public then.
Yeah, I mean, they kind of come out at the same time. And then right around, I mean, she's talking about, she published her book in 1999, Thanks for the Memories, which is a memoir. And then she talked about it publicly. And I'm not sure how much of it was recorded, but some of the more significant things that she said and her appearances were recorded, so you can listen to them. But then at some time, around 9/11, 2001, I'm not sure where it was in terms of that, but a little bit before, a little bit after, she is like she's out of the public as a major speaker and whistleblower. And so I'm also not sure exactly when Kathy kind of comes on as a major speaker, but they were somewhat contemporary. Well, they were quite contemporary. They even knew each other.
Well, Mark, and you had mentioned, and we read in her book where they had traveled together for a while, and Bryce's, finances were paying for Kathy and Mark travel expenses.
Right. So they do come, their paths cross directly. And in fact, Bryce Taylor talks about it in her book. I don't know to what extent Kathy O'Brien ever talks about Bryce Taylor, but Bryce Taylor does talk about both Kathy O'Brien and Mark Phillips, who now I'm not nearly as familiar at this point with Kathy O'Brien as Bryce Taylor, which is her pen name. Her real name was Sue Ford. But for most people, they're gonna, if they know anything at all, they're gonna be more familiar with Kathy O'Brien just because she's been more prolific and current. And so a lot of people will reference her.
If you had to say that Bryce Taylor's book was important for two reasons, what pops into your head as the most important two reasons?
I don't know, two? That's funny. Not one, not three, but two. Yeah, gosh. Well, I guess the first thing would be that if you think of it, and this would be true for whistleblowers generally, but she was there. I mean, sometimes they'll say like the very first thing about a whistleblower is that they were there. So if you have someone who's like, say, a CIA whistleblower, like there's somebody right now in the news, or maybe more than one. But before you even get to like, well, are they telling the truth? Are they not? Is this valuable? Are they tricking me? I mean, anything like that. It's like, well, were they there? How are they even in a position to know things? So for example, on Jeffrey Epstein's island, there were staff, there were people who worked there. There were maids and chefs and assistants. Okay. These are all people who were there. Now, are they there and they have immunity? Are they there and they have complicity? Were they there and they're lying? Were they there and they were co-conspirators? I mean, these are all questions, but this starts first with, were they there? And then so for me, for example, I've been there as it is at several times and in different ways, and in limited ways. But so anyway, the thing about Bryce Taylor is she was very much there. Unless you take her entire testimony and her entire life in her book and say none of it's true, then you need to like acknowledge the fact that she's talking about things from a firsthand perspective. And then even if you were to say like, well, I don't believe she knew Henry Kissinger or Richard Nixon. So for example, those are two people she talks about a whole lot. Then, okay, but then you can walk it back and say like, well, where did she come from? I mean, she was born in Los Angeles. She grew up in Woodland Hills. She went to the Presbyterian Church. She went to Taft High School. I think she was class president. She was well known in her class, as was the person she married, Craig Ford, who, did a bunch of stuff, including going to USC Dental School. And then, so, you're in a position where even if you want to start off being especially critical and skeptical, which I think is fine, you have to start dealing with some of the things that she's talking about, because she's talking about things that are in reality that can be checked. So that would be, I think, number one. It's somebody who is, I mean, in even my number one, it's going to have like a bunch of sub things under it. Okay. So she was there, but not only was she there, but she put it down in writing and published it and really urgently wanted people to read it. She also spoke about it. She spoke about it in public. She spoke about it extemporaneously. She did it with other people like Ted Gunderson. And you can think whatever you want about him also, but he, through his career, had managed to put himself where he was the head FBI man at Memphis, then Dallas, of all places, Dallas, then Los Angeles. And Los Angeles is basically Southern California. So that includes San Diego, Orange County, and a bunch of other stuff. And it includes most of the places that she's talking about. So I put all that under number one, as a whistleblower who was there. So she was a witness to history in some big ways. And I guess I'd also say, yesterday was supposed to be MK Ultra hearing day, and that got postponed. But let's say that there's some new revelations about MK Ultra and some new documents and new testimony, and we find out some stuff, whatever that stuff is. Well, she documented her firsthand account of everything she knew about it, and that could be compared with the new revelations.
To see what matches. Yeah.
Yeah. Does it match? Does it not match? Does it answer questions? Does it raise more questions? In every way you look at it, it's helpful. And, we talk a lot about puzzle pieces.
Mm-hmm.
To not look at her book would be to say like, well, there's a bunch of puzzle pieces, but let's just try to solve the puzzle without it.
Yeah, we can get the main picture without that.
That wouldn't make sense. Yeah, it wouldn't make sense.
Mm-mm.
Maybe the second thing would be, I don't know if it would be the second thing, but one of the things that has struck me about it is how internally consistent it is. So she talks about one of the criticisms of it is nobody could live that much of a life in that time. There's too many things going on, too many places to be, that it overlaps. Like it's just not possible. So that's like, if you were coming into it with skepticism, that would be one of the obvious things that you would meet first. So, okay, but, and I don't know that can be entirely dismissed, other than, as you learn about it, you can kind of like continually evaluate it with that kind of question. But the thing is, it's internally consistent. So she's like, if you thought of it as fiction, she's managed to put together like a universe that's like the Harry Potter universe. It's like that much stuff, except for when J.K. Rowling puts together the Harry Potter universe, she makes it all up. I mean, she can draw from mythology and draw from history, which she did, and kind of put it together in complex ways. But, she can rewrite characters, she can change, she can evolve things. In the case of Bryce Taylor, she's talking about people in history, things that happened, events. So she's talking about things that are out of sequence or out of history, they don't line up in time or otherwise. It's going to show up. And there aren't any major like plot holes in the whole thing. I don't even know that there are very many minor ones, if there are. If they are, they're easily accountable. Like, oh, I thought it was 1968, it was 1969 kind of thing. But I don't even know if there's many of those. So that would be another reason to read it. As opposed to, there's a bunch of stuff. Maybe some of it's true, maybe some of it isn't. Can't really figure it out. Some of this stuff doesn't check out, but other stuff does. It's not like that. So like the internal consistency, and then including to the extent you can refer to things in internal consistency, and then also to the extent that it refers to things that that are documented in history. And because she's talking about celebrities and politicians and famous people, almost all of it can be. And then just to give one example of that, she has a whole chapter on the Dodgers because she's in Los Angeles in Southern California. So she's talking about different players on the team and their wives and their kids and relationships and what happens. And just for example, I mean, I grew up in Southern California and I played baseball and I was a fan of the team, so I knew some things about this. I was very young, but I knew at least a little bit. And so I looked it up. I looked up stuff that I didn't think could be true. So it's specifically about Steve Garvey, who ended up Dodger Diamond. Yeah, chapter 26. So it's about Steve Garvey. And then because he kind of had this like squeaky clean image, kind of like how Oliver North was presented back in the day. And then you find out, well, that life's more complicated than that. But like to the extent that she's talking about stuff, it checks out. His wife is who she's talking about. And they did have 2 daughters and they did, and so that would be the other reason. So like if I had to pick 2, at least off the top of my head, one would be like she's a whistleblower who was there. So she was a witness to these really hugely important parts of history. And then the other one is that it's internally consistent, which is kind of a circumstantial way of proving things. But I mean, I don't know. I actually don't know I don't know anything like it, to be honest. I mean, it's a thick book and it's just jam packed with facts. I mean, but not like a history book. It's a personal account. I mean, it's jaw dropping in its scope.
And it names names and it gives details.
Yeah, nobody's named names like she did. I mean nobody. So
Well,
then that
Kathy
was
O'Brien's
something.
book names a lot of names. That's why it's worth comparing together because they both were involved with Mark Phillips at the time, same time frame. They
Mhm.
both have very similar discussions. They both name names very blatantly without even like, I don't know if I should say this or not. Just like this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. I was here, he did this. I called him this, he did this, and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
They
Right.
both do that.
Mhm.
But nobody else does and nothing has happened because of that, and that's where I have a lot of issue.
Yeah. Well, and I haven't read Kathy O'Brien's book. I'm aware of it, and I've read sections of it, and I've heard her speak. So I feel like I know it generally, but I actually don't know. So anything I say is based on like the limits of what I know and what I'm aware of. I didn't mean it as, I guess I didn't mean it as like an absolute fact. I meant it as like of everything that I know and know of. But to the extent that I have looked at Kathy O'Brien's book, it's not as, it's just, it doesn't contain as much just volume and detail based on what I know, which is not everything. So it's kind of with that caveat. And anyway, I mean, I don't reference her to so much in this sense to say like, well, this is better than that or this versus that. It's
Right,
more like,
yeah.
to take the thing that's especially well known, and that would be Kathy O'Brien, and then say, but there's this other thing that was contemporary and it like matches up in ways that are like favorable that make me wonder. I mean, I'll be like perfectly honest. It makes me wonder why one is so prominent, has such an easy way to get to the public in a time where, whistleblowers are like almost, I mean, I think it's probably never been so well known and accepted that it can be really difficult to be a whistleblower talking about things that affect, everyone, or talking about like famous people or really powerful institutions. So, you have Kathy O'Brien out there and she's not to take anything away from her, but she's able to speak at events, with other speakers where they charge money, which is fine as far as that goes, rent venues, hire security, and just be able to have these events that, sell t-shirts, sell books, sign autographs. I don't know,
That's the
where you
part
have,
that's a little concerning because the venues are sometimes places Kathy was abused by the owners or this, that, or the other. And so it's like, what? Why would she go
yeah,
back?
so that would be a curious fact. I mean, to me, that wouldn't really, I mean, like, I feel like she can speak wherever she wants. And like, and that a plausible explanation could be, as witness that I've overcome that, I'll speak
Right.
right where, just like an alcoholic that's in recovery, that's sober, could go to a bar and say, doesn't matter. You can pour
Yeah,
the alcohol right in front of my face. This isn't me. I'm changed. So she could, but
it's a very good point.
if an alcoholic, like
Has an
in
issue.
recovery, right, went into a bar, but didn't want anyone to know about that and was kind of like weird about talking about it, well, that would be kind of different. So, yeah, I mean, to the extent that that's true, that it would be odd if she doesn't at least acknowledge or explain it. That would make me wonder. But the bigger thing is, and it's not really personal to her, it's more like, how is she able, or why is she able to speak so freely? Like, I don't feel like I can speak that freely. I feel like I get hammered by some disclosures I make
Wow, that's
if
interesting.
if it gets any kind of if it gets any kind of airtime. I mean, I don't think anybody cares what I say if nobody's listening to me, but if somebody starts listening to me, if it starts to resonate, then I get, some kind of smear campaign. I get defamed, I get isolated from people who would be my natural allies. But that doesn't appear to happen to Kathy O'Brien, which makes me wonder why.
Yeah, and why, in terms of the whistleblowers that are allowed to speak publicly and name names like that and speak
Mm,
in Masonic halls and different situations, and be known nationally, how come others are killed?
right.
That's the question I have. I
Y-
I
Right.
don't discount anybody's stories. I don't stand, and I hope this, if anyone ever listens to what you and I are saying, I hope nobody comes away with the fact that we are trying to detract away from what either of them have disclosed. What the question I
Right.
have, and I want to make sure that it's well known, is that I don't understand the whistleblower protection schematic in our country because some whistleblowers are promoted, some whistleblowers are immediately killed before their story can even be known. Some whistleblowers are allowed to talk and then they're controlled and you can see the control.
Hmm.
And it's there's not a normal method that we use to protect the whistleblower, hear the information, and seek justice.
Hmm.
And it's very frustrating to me that these large stories that have large names involved and those names are still on our streets and still in our companies and still controlling things. And why is
Hmm.
nothing being done if they're that well known? While these other people who are talking about the same things are being killed for saying the same things.
Right.
That's a disconnect. It's kind of like the same problem I have with you can smoke pot or not, but why is it legal and you can make traffic money and all these tips and things over here, but you can go to jail
Hmm.
over here for it in the same country? Like
Right.
that's not okay. So
Yeah.
there needs to
Well,
be an even playing field here.
yeah. Well, sometimes, like, on something like that, like, I'll think the answer's in the question, you know, like, sometimes. And I
Yeah.
think that that's kind of a case. It's like, well, why? Or I mean, maybe, an answer is in the question, maybe. But if it's like, well, why can't we, why some whistleblowers like this and then other whistleblowers like that? Well, well, if you're whistleblowing at a certain level or about a certain thing, so like at the Washington D.C. national level, like, say something like that, um, or like really any kind of judicial system, because it's sort of like the top of its own pyramid, or hierarchy wherever you are. So like, I'm in Orange County, there's corruption in the court system, the family court system, for sure. There really isn't anything above it, as a practical matter. And so it gets to be, so when you're like, why aren't they doing anything about it? Well, you're kind of appealing to the they in the first place. Like, why is it dangerous of the whistleblowers about, something like that? It's like, well, it's the entity that you're dealing with. So it's like if you can't get above it, then it gets to be really difficult. So, and then just kind of as an aside, I mean, that was something that like, that's not a real original idea. That's something the founding fathers, the people that, like, thought about a lot and debated, different kinds of systems of government around the founding of the country. So one of the things that they came to was the idea that, like, well, if we're not going to have a king or a monarch or a head like that, a dictator, then, we're going to fall under like the law. We're going to say we're going to organize. We're going to be everyone's going to be subject to law. Well, then, people know they have, like, well, we have checks and balances, separation of powers, these three branches, have all that. But there was still, like, well, what if, there were like some what ifs. And actually there were some with the judiciary specifically. But that was why the free press was so important, freedom of speech, the other aspects of the First Amendment, but especially the freedom of the press. Because there was an idea that, like, well, there's always going to be a check on the whole thing itself, like the government itself and all of the branches and whatever they're doing.
Yeah.
You need the people to know what's going on and to have some ability to do something about it. And that part's missing too. So, when you're whistleblowing, you're kind of trying to reach the people. But I think we find ourselves in places where the media is kind of captured. There's the right to speak, but, do we have much of a free press? I mean,
Yeah.
not really, I don't think. Not in Orange County, California, that's for sure. And so how do you get to it? So then you get back to, like, Kathy O'Brien out there speaking. It's sort of like, it's not really about her personally. It's more like how is she able to speak so freely when high profile or high stakes whistleblowers are hammered? I actually think one explanation is she's talking about historical things mostly. So I do think that's one reason. It's
Right.
like at a certain point, you're talking about, like, what happened in the past, not so much what's going on now. And I understand, like, that, MK Ultra continues and these things are all connected, but I do think that that's a part of it. But I don't think it really explains. I don't think that's the main explanation. And then I have ideas about why that is. I mean,
About
what do you
why
think?
that.
Well, about why? I mean, just like as a thought exercise, why is Kathy O'Brien able to speak relatively freely when other people can't? I mean, just as a
Yeah.
what?
It's brought up
How?
a lot of questions. I don't see people theorizing the answers to that.
Yeah, I mean, even if you took the position, like, I mean, one thing you could think of is like, well, she's controlled. I mean, she's limited and she's being guided. It's a controlled narrative. It's a limited disclosure slowly over time. I mean, these are ideas. She's being handled. She's been reprogrammed. There's like a lot of ideas like that.
Hmm.
But you could also take the position that that's crazy, that's heresy. How dare you even think that? I actually think that's kind of where a lot of people are coming from. This is sacred. You can't talk about that. You can't even wonder or question it. So, but even if that's your perspective, then you could still say, like, well, I mean, but seriously, how is she able to do it? What can we learn?
Right.
How is she able to be successful? What can other
Right.
whistleblowers learn from what she's been able to figure out? So, I mean, any way you look at it, I think there's a way to approach it with, sincerity and
Right.
curiosity. But when people say, she's the hero, you can't talk about that, how dare you, or something like that, well, then I don't even think that does a service to the whistleblower, because a real
I don't think so.
whistleblower, I think, would think, be critical. It is hard to believe. Do research, see what checks out, challenge me, ask me questions. That would be like a whistleblower like
Yeah.
that. I mean, and you hear people will say that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this all kind of centers around the idea that we're judging whistleblowers. We're still not just bringing judgment or justice to any of the perpetrators. And that's where
Hmm.
I think all of our questions reside on the fact that these are disclosure books. These are very important books. Bryce's
Hmm.
book was such a eye-opening discussion for a lot of things in my own survivor story. So I can't imagine
hmm
anybody else who's read it, how it has like opened and helped them put the puzzle pieces together. So
Right.
imagine if that was a best time seller. Everybody was talking about it, and people were
Yeah.
on Good Morning America talking about what was in chapter 26 or all of these
Right.
different things. But it's not for
No,
some
no,
reason,
it's,
even though we're talking about MK Ultra, we're talking
hmm
about the thing in public. So there's a disconnect in the disclosure that is stressful to the fact that the people who are talking about it, who are trying to get the connections between the MK Ultra movement, the disclosure movement, the targeted individual movement, that whole situation is very much clouded in terminology, SEO,
hmm
misunderstandings, and all of that stuff. And now all of it is trending, but we're still not getting any solutions. Some people are able to go popular and other people are dying for the same topics.
right.
And
And so
and that's where it's
why?
yeah,
Yeah,
why? Why
why?
is it all trending right now and we
No.
don't have any
Yeah.
answers yet? So I know we're
Well,
at a
but
cusp of something, but
But I mean, we kind of have, I mean, but where are the answers going to come from? I mean,
we all kind of
maybe they're going to come from me and you. I mean, what do you expect like CNN to break this? They're going to go like, "Hey, we finally figured out why nobody's reading Bryce Taylor's
no,
book."
I expect so this
They're
is what
never
I
going to.
expect. Do you know how Alex Jones randomly every 6 months will go, "Oh my God, they're here. They're here. They're going to shut us down. Everything's getting shut down. We're losing everything. We're going to lose it. They're
Yeah,
shutting us down. They're walking
I know.
into the place and they're shut." I expect
I know.
CNN, ABC, Fox News, MSNBC, Bilderberg surveillance, all of the things. I expect
Yeah.
them to be like, "Oh my God, they're here shutting us down." And then actual people walking in to like shut them down and take them to jail for lying and colluding and all these things. I
Yeah.
expect that. I know it's not going to happen, but like the expectation has been put there that when you do something wrong, they are going to SWAT you and do all of these things. And now that's happening to whistleblowers and non-criminals and people who are trying to do the right thing, but it's not happening to the CNNs and the ABCs and the different people who are named in the files and named in the stories and named in the discussions and named in the things. And we're still joking about how we have to say allegedly behind everything that has all this proof and all these videos and all these things.
Right.
And right when AI gets made, when you can make an AI video out of any words that you want to, all of a
Yeah.
sudden it's trending that we can now talk about MK Ultra, vaccines are bad, MK, dare was
I
bad, like
know.
all this stuff. We can talk about it now,
Yeah.
but nothing's going to happen. And when you talk about it to a certain point, you could still be killed, but these people are going to make $1 million off of the same words.
Yeah, so
That's a
why?
problem.
What's the difference? Is it the skill with which they're doing things? Is it, like literally, like why? You know? What's the reason? I actually think a lot of it is down to things like controlling narratives, controlling disclosure over time,
Yeah.
limited hangout kind of thing. Because I think that like say that there's some stuff that you that's classified and secret that that has to do with history that the government or the people involved would rather you not know about,
hmm
which I
There's a
think
lot of
is
that.
kind of that's kind of obvious, right? That's not going too
Yeah.
far
Mm.
down a road to say that, so there's
We could all
stuff.
agree. I think
And they'll
there's
call it
something.
national security. Okay, so but there'll be stuff like that. Well, then what are you gonna do? Because you're gonna like be like, well, we got secrets, we got to keep secrets. Well, what are we gonna do? To keep it because we don't want the people to find out certain things for whatever reason.
That's
And
interesting too, actually, because Kathy's testimony was labeled a matter of national security. So
well, I
maybe
think
they do
that's
know these things, and
well, I
they,
do. Yeah, I think well, national security has historically been maybe the number one way to say, look, it's a free country. The government works for you. We have all of these rights, which include the right to know, what the heck's going on,
yeah,
where the money's being spent. who's doing what, this kind of stuff. But it's like, okay, but there's certain things we can't tell you. Be like, well, what do you mean you
Yeah.
can't tell me? Well, then that's where you get, well, national security is like the number one. It reminds me of like in family courts, they'll say best interest of the children. So anytime they want to close a court or do anything, they'll be like, well, we're talking about minors. We got to close the court. It's like, well,
Right.
that's okay. That's true. I mean, just like it is for national security, but it's kind of a convenient way to, you can throw a bunch of stuff under that too. And then, everything ends up, anything we don't want to talk about is national security, or anything that would show up corruption or other problems that we don't want to talk about. We'll just say it's, it has to do with minors, and so it's sealed, it's closed. You can't talk about it.
That is a very good point. That reminds me when JFK said he was gonna splinter the CIA into the wind, and
Yeah,
then here we are today.
right. So, but I think, so if you think though, like if you're on the other side, like say I'm the person that is on the government side, and either or it's my job to make sure that stuff doesn't get out. I got to protect the secrets. I got to protect the people for whatever reason. That's what I'm paid to do, or I have an interest in it, and I just don't care. This is what I'm going to do. Well, then how am I going to do it? Am I going to look out there and see like a million people with their computers, like researching stuff, and go, I'm going to argue with and fight with a million different people that are trying to figure out what's going on? Or am I going to do something else? Be like, well, you're going to lose that one, no matter how big your, data center and supercomputers are. It's just too many people. But, I'm going to like prop up some people. Like, I mean, not necessarily them, but people like Alex Jones, or people like Kathy O'Brien, or people like Ian Carroll, or people like that, not necessarily them, but people who kind of have that influence. They have credibility with the base. It's looking, real side eye at the government, and they're doing real work, and they're talking about real things. But if I can get them over on my side and then slowly disclose stuff over time, then
Yeah.
that would be far more effective way to fight this, what Alex Jones called info war. Other people, too. But, I can do it that way. And then I can just sort of reveal things slowly over time. And then the other thing I can do is I can kind of shade it in certain ways. I can put it in a certain way. To
Yeah.
where people that would find something like there's no way they would accept things, that they'll do it incrementally. Like a lot of the transgender stuff in the schools, like that would have just smacked people as really wrong if it had all come at once, but it came, really slowly over time. And so a lot of the people were, accepting it as, okay, or kind of normal or new normal, where they wouldn't have if it had all come just, all at once.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. All at once, like, kind of is now to the younger generation.
yeah. So sometimes when I see this, so then if there's somebody's like, well, how is that whistleblower, broadcaster, podcaster, influencer, whatever, able to do things that other people aren't or seemingly can't, like they would get in trouble, or they would be publicly shamed, or they would be, whatever. They would be canceled if they were to do that. But some people can do it and others can't. It makes me wonder about that. That
Like
doesn't
what?
prove anything. It just makes me wonder about it.
Right.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, like Alex Jones. I mean, he had like what, $1 billion settlement against him and a bunch of other stuff, and he's in trouble, but yet he's not. Even when they close InfoWars, it just pops up in a different way. It's almost like
Yeah.
he's protected in a way, you know. But
Absolutely.
so you'll have people that seem to be like fighting like the man, the government, the big thing, City Hall. But but maybe they aren't. Maybe they're just like pulling their punches a little bit and making it look good. Because then, why would you listen to me or to you or to somebody else when there's somebody with a slicker broadcast and a bigger platform who's already doing it, apparently bigger and better?
Well, that's kind
But
of how I
then,
feel about the MK Ultra stuff. Not to cut you off,
mhm.
sorry.
No, I think you're
I
right.
remember your but the MK Ultra stuff and all these different like so there's the cult podcasts that are like, a little bit smaller, mainstream, but they're talking about the real stuff, like Cults to
Hmm.
Consciousness, even Imagination with her
Hmm.
MK Ultra library.
Right.
And then that went trending. Everybody's talking about it to some extent. Now you've got Maya Bialik is talking about mind control and MK Ultra. And she was Blossom. I don't know if you know who Maya Bialik is,
Hmm.
but you've got Kardashians talking about conspiracies. You've got
Right.
there's like giant celebrities who are,
Yeah.
from our understanding, under this puppet string of control that they can't drink a glass of milk unless we, tell them to type situation. A lot of people think they're talking about this stuff now too. So
Yeah.
it's interesting to me that, like, when you say that they disclose to a certain point, they have to. And that's unfortunately where it gets the feeling of sometimes with these large influencer disclosure accounts, because it doesn't look like they are not handled. And that's the
Yeah.
scary part, because I want survivors to be able to grow up, heal, do their thing, tell their story if they want to,
Right.
not tell their story if they don't want
Yeah.
to, sell a product, sell a book, sell a jewelry, whatever they're going to do, go talk. I want them
Yeah.
to be able to do the thing.
Right.
I don't want somebody,
Right.
and I don't want them to be vulnerable so that somebody comes in and goes, I have to control this. And it seems like
Right.
when a survivor gets to a certain point, we see they are controlled or they are silenced. And that's not changing. So if we're not asking, are
Right.
all of these giant survivors who are now promoted on every podcast, everywhere, has every book, has billions of dollars, all these things, are they
Hmm.
safe, free, happy, healthy, and okay? Or is that a story we are being told to control us? And I
Right.
think we just need to be able to ask those questions, talk about that stuff, think for ourselves. And you can't think for yourself if you can't even ask certain questions. I know in a lot of realms right now, especially since the whole COVID situation, it's like, oh, I don't know if I should bring that up. Now, we don't know what that is. That is defined by a certain person whenever they think that is stressful to somebody else. But it
Hmm.
used to be like, okay, I'm going to talk about this. I'm not going to talk about this, whatever. During COVID, we all got into a situation where, like, that, whatever that is, that's stressful to talk about. So I might not discuss that here. And that really changed the way a lot
Right.
of people learn things, because then the algorithms are trained off of what you don't look at. The news doesn't show to you if you don't look at that word. So, like, we're not
Right.
able to get information, and now they're controlling the storytellers who have the knowledge. So
Yeah.
this is a rough time to live in, I think, for people that weren't alive before the internet, weren't alive before, I mean, Kathy O'Brien, to credit everything that she has been doing, has been
Hmm.
speaking since you had to drive in a, what was she talking about in her book? Like, she had to drive in a pickup and use payphone money, and she was making printer copy money with the change she could find in between the seats. So, like, she's been through it trying to get the knowledge out there from what we know, and
Right.
nothing has happened. Nothing, there's no justice, and these children are still in the situations. The gate programs are still going on. So that's
Mm.
where I'm getting to the point where I'm excited that some whistleblowers are able to make a living for themselves as an influencer, but I'm really hoping that that whole process is not part of the control mechanism that's going to create no solutions, and our grandchildren are still going through this if the world is still here. And that's what I don't want to happen, right? And so when we talk about
Yeah.
Bryce Taylor, can we talk about Bryce Taylor mentioning that Kathy's love of her life said Bryce never went through anything after, she paid $50,000 for their travel and stuff? Like, are we
Oh,
allowed to say that?
well, see, that's the thing. That's the so all of this, is kind of like the thing for me. Like, we should be able to talk about all of it. And and I mean, especially when we're talking about things like this, about high stakes whistleblowers, government programs that, you know, people want to keep secret. And then especially people who, for in whatever way, are identify as targeted or victims of kind of like systemic or systematic, deliberate abuse, especially as
Yes.
children, then we need to be able to talk about that. Even if, and by the way, I think that's true even for people who are extremely skeptical. So
Yeah.
people who say, I don't believe any of that. I think to whatever extent there was a program, it ended. I think, the people that were running it, while, they went off the rails, they were doing something that was important. Now, I don't think that, but even people, if that was where they were starting from or coming from, remember, they're coming from it with they've been immersed in propaganda and official narrative since forever. Like I would want them to be able to talk and think and prove their point or say where they're coming from, because I think the end result of it would be that we would get much closer to the truth faster if there was that dialogue. And so conversely, it means, if you're kind of with me on that, then it means that if you want to keep the status
Conversations.
quo, if you want to keep it the way that it is, if you're in the, like, say, 1% or 0.1% or even fewer, handful of people that really benefit from things the way that they are, then you don't want people talking, and you don't even want them talking, even if they're kind of like on your side. What you want is for people to be like doing endless research and talking about things and fighting with each other and division within, communities where people should be on the same page. So yeah, I mean, I just think I think it's really interesting. I think it's important. I think it's more interesting than almost all of the fiction going on. So people watch drama on TV at night. They like to watch cop dramas and solve crimes and do all these things in the fantasy world, but then they don't want to look at it when it's like, something in reality more compelling, more incredible is going on in real life, but they can't be bothered to look at that. And even that's interesting, like why?
Right.
So yeah, I almost feel like the opposing voices need to be heard too, so like someone coming from, not necessarily me, but people coming from like where we're coming from with a lot of questions and some knowledge really should be heard. If not me, people that, that are kind of thinking the same way. But by the same token, I think even people who are engaged, who would like oppose me, like sincerely, to the extent that there are people like that they should be heard too. I mean, I want to have the conversation. So like Bryce Taylor, for instance,
Yeah.
I'm not of the opinion like, hey, you need to read this and understand that it's fact and you need to believe everything in it and you need to do it now. I don't think that at all. What I want is to have the conversation. Here is someone who lived a life, and here are the things that she said. And I think she established it well enough to where it ought to be heard. And so I want people to look at it. And if they look at it and they go, that's crazy, then that would be a great conversation and be like, okay, let's look at chapter 26, what you said about the Dodgers, to the extent that we
Yeah.
can check it
Let's do
out.
it.
Does it check out or not?
Well, that's a good point. Do you mind if I drop a point there?
No, go ahead.
So when you were
That's
talking about Steve
yeah.
Garvey, I looked up his daughters
Yeah.
because
Right.
Bryce Taylor talks about how his daughters were put in the lineup as well. I've heard the lineup from, I
Right.
believe Kathy talked about the lineup, but I know Kathy talked about how she talked about like Pete Rose and the Reds and the gambling, how the baseball players are used in MK Ultra. So that checks in both stories.
Hmm.
Baseball was talked about, but I also looked up Steve and Cindy Garvey's children, and there's a article that came out in 80 that ruined their marriage. It was discussed, and
Hmm.
then after that, it discusses this whole. It's a research starter, so they're just looking at the whole story.
Yeah.
It goes through a lot of discussion. I'm not going to bore the whole situation, but a lot of it would somewhat align with what Bryce was talking about in terms of like if you look at it in terms of they were talking about he was having affairs, he had addictions, he
Hmm.
was abusive. Okay, so those threads of behaviors are also probably the same threads of behaviors that the people that were doing the stuff that Bryce Taylor is talking about were doing and acting like and being like. So there's that. But
Right.
then also it says Steve continued playing baseball until 87. Da, 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 da. So Cindy wrote in her memoir she remembers that she was abused by her father and emotionally abused by Steve. But then the daughters talk about why they are estranged from him as well. The daughters talk about the emotional upbringing, all the different abuse and situations and paternal situations. So Nobody is actually coming out and saying physically, my dad did this. He put me in the lineups. But all three of them are saying that the household was very similar to the mentality that someone that did that to Bryce would
Right.
have been. And so if
Right.
we understand how, when you talk about Loftus and the false memory syndromes, or we talk about like all these different situations where like that memory came later, or I don't know, we have to understand that some people's memories are blocked out and they also are labeled something from very early on so that that child doesn't say something in the wrong way to the wrong person. So when
Right.
people disclose things 30 years later and say, was mean to me, we don't actually know what that meant because a lot of it has
Right.
been pushed aside. So there's going to be a big, issue with, well, where's your proof? Okay, well, we might not have a physical video of every single time every single one of these people did something MK Ultra to somebody, but we might have fruits of the spirit that show this
Hmm.
guy was like not working in a really good way for many decades. If he also aligned with this person who did this and he also aligned with this person that did this,
Right.
that to me is enough to be like, I'm going to believe these people. It's not enough
Hmm.
for a judgment, obviously. We have no justice. There's nobody in I think he got a slap on the wrist or some jail for something. I don't remember, but it was, whatever. But it
Yeah.
wasn't for what Bryce is talking about. It wasn't for the girls in the lineups, right? And so we're not going to
Right.
get justice, but it's enough for me to believe the survivor, not ask for proof, not need that. And I don't understand why our people who are in government, even Trump, like I don't understand how any of them can't operate in the same understanding so that it reaches the courts, it reaches the lawyers, unless that whole system is corrupt to align away from justice. Because,
Well, and
you
we
know,
have a lot of evidence that it is
right. And so
corrupt.
that's where I'm at. How do we, it's when we want solutions, we want justice. We don't have a justice system that allows justice. We have statute of limitations on crimes that should never have a statute of limitations on them. We have legal laws and all kinds of things that I don't think should exist. I don't think we have a system that allows for justice. I think the people who are doing the problems have created the system so they can't be in trouble, kind of like our tax code. The rich people know how to use the tax code,
Hmm.
and I think that's the system we're in. I think technically they can arrest somebody for a crime, but I think these crimes are so well organized, so well hidden, so well intricate that it we're not looking for legal justice. I don't think we can get legal justice with what we have as a system because look what's been disclosed for 60 years. Look who Tom Homan knows Kathy O'Brien. They've talked. He knows my story, she has said. So if
Hmm.
our border czar knows
Hmm.
that and he's in charge of
Yeah.
trafficking and stuff, is he talking to Susie Wiles, who knew Reagan, who was named in Kathy O'Brien's book? Like that would be Susie Wiles is Trump's right hand woman right now. So like I would like to connect
Yeah.
dots and see who knew what, why are they still where they are, and how can
Hmm.
we change the whole system to be like that was really shitty. As Clinton said, we did that. We should not do that
Wow.
anymore. He
Right.
said we did it while he was doing it. And that's the problem. You know, these
Yeah.
presidents used the mind slaves. And who's using these mind slaves now? Who's using these sex slaves, these diamonds?
Yeah. Right. Exactly. If you're to believe what's being said, but I mean, that's what I mean. We should at least be able to have the conversation about it.
Yeah.
Because I kind of feel like it's understandable that people are dubious because, if we're going to say like, well, the programs are real, they're powerful, they're advanced, they're omnipresent, like if you're going to say, MK Ultra never ended and it's whatever it's called and however it's being used, it's like it's embedded in everything. It's a part of what's broadcast. It's in your smartphones that you carry around, which are
Yep.
tracking you. All of, if you're going to say all of that, then and then you're going to be saying, "Hey, people, wake up." Well, you're telling people to wake up whose entire lives have been in that environment, and so for them to be dubious about it as a starting point, I think is understandable, And then like if we feel like we're on something and we know it based on experience or whatever, then part of the question becomes like, well, how do you reach people? How do you get them to move in their thinking a little bit? And then as far
Yeah.
as the people, like so often it's like, well, we've been doing this and they keep, and that kind of dynamic. At this point, I feel like it's like a lot of the problems and a lot of the things that we talk about are structural, So,
Yeah.
it's kind of like, why won't Trump do X? Or why hasn't anyone been arrested? Or why all of these questions? And I mean, they're good questions, but I mean, to some extent, I feel like it's even more fundamental or systemic than even that. Like, how do we like reset or change the status quo in a way to where people in the future, if they're in charge or in these positions or doing these things, can't do it the same way because of the way it's set up. So like I feel like it's a huge deal that the press, I don't feel like we have a free press. It kind of is, but it's not really. And so,
Yeah.
it's being used to kind of propagandize things and to deliver narratives in certain ways. I mean, COVID was a really good example of that. And at
Yeah.
the same time, it's used to shunt stories, to shape narratives, and to omit huge parts of what's really going on from being told. Allie Carter's a good example of that. You
Right.
have her.
Yeah.
She says, I mean, to take it like, again, in kind of a skeptical way, well, you have someone, she's saying these things that are really hard to believe, but she's got receipts. She says she does. They've been validated in some ways that I think that are satisfactory to me, at least more than enough as a starting point to say, okay, well, she's established some things. Let's learn more. Plus, she has a mom who adopted her. Plus, there was a smear campaign against her that was meant to discredit her. But I think the very fact that that smear campaign happened and that no one's gotten into trouble, apparently, for even that, which was like outrageous, like violent bullying, cyberbullying,
Oh,
is
no
that
filter,
actually
targeted harassment, gang
evidence, yeah,
stalking.
targeted. But whether you believe her or not, or wherever you're coming to her with her story, I mean, how is that not in the news? I mean,
Right.
she's talking
Right.
about what happened when the sheriff in the place where it happened is
Hmm.
running for governor, and his career coincides perfectly with her life. Doesn't mean he's complicit. Doesn't mean anything. Doesn't even mean he's a bad guy or you shouldn't vote for him, like in and of itself. But when he won't talk about it, the news won't report about it, and nobody even will ask questions in a way that gets it to the public generally, a public that's being asked who they want to lead them, then
Hmm.
I mean, so then who's the bad guy? Is it, Trump or this guy, Chad Bianco, the sheriff, or Katie Porter, one of his opponents, or someone else? Or is it, or the LA Times or the Orange County Register or whatever? Or like where I
People look who you
start to
know.
come from is it's kind of like all of it in a system
Hmm.
that where the important stories aren't reported, crimes about children are completely omitted. The only people who can run for office are people who are playing games and are complicit, at least in some way. And I mean, in a press, it's just not going to tell certain stories. And then
Yeah.
moneyed interests benefiting from a status quo. And so then it doesn't really matter who wins the election or who owns the newspaper or these kind of things, like if things get captured in a certain way. And so I think that's part of the problem that we're having. And then, I mean, we could start a podcast and start talking about it and, every day look at the news and talk about what's going on. And we might not really be even denting, the bigger problem. Maybe. So I always think like that's why I think it's important to ask questions like, what about Bryce Taylor? What about Kathy O'Brien? Why are some people able to talk about it and some aren't? What's going on? Who's in charge? Why can't the president said declassify this stuff and yet it's
Yeah.
not declassified. Why not? I mean, is he not really the president? Is he saying one thing, but behind the scenes they're doing something else? Or are there
That
other
would be
powerful
interesting.
forces that are intervening where he's really trying to declassify this and he can't because he's not in charge of as much as we thought. I mean,
Yeah.
what's going on? The CIA apparently like reclaimed their own documents from the Director of National Intelligence, which the president wanted declassified, and which the House of Representatives, who are the people we actually vote for to represent us, or at least some of the members, they're trying to have hearings and talk about it. Like, what's going on? Who's even in charge?
That's what I'd like to know. I thought it was interesting structure-wise to hear Kiriako talk about how in the CIA, they don't care about who the sitting president is because the CIA directors and the organizers and in that group are like long-term appointments. They're there longer than the 4 years of a president. So if they don't like what a president's doing and want to control things a different way, they'll wait out that president's term until somebody else comes in. So you've got
Hmm.
collusion from behind the scenes for decades with some of the same characters. And we think that the
Yeah.
president is control, but really these people behind the scenes are pulling these strings to create psyops issues, cases, all kinds of stuff to do whatever they want to do, cover up whatever intelligence, and they can just outlast a 4 year president. So we don't really have a powerful president in charge if that's the case.
To
And
the
then
extent that's the case, yeah.
right.
And
It
that's
makes
not going to
sense
be,
because
that's
thinking of
not
like
just,
how long those people have been in office. Yeah.
well, I was just going to say that's going to be true of things that are much bigger in terms of people than like an
Like judges.
intelligence agency. Well, I was thinking of like the State Department or the Department of Defense. Like when people
Hmm.
talk about deep state, I think that to me, that's what it's talking about. It's like this institutional structure that's there that
Yeah.
operates largely independent of, whoever the people are voting for. And it's especially problematic in the executive because, like with the judiciary, you have like, if you think of the three branches, you have the courts, you have the Supreme Court, and then all the courts, and they go down to like the counties. So there's lots of them, and then in the even at the federal level in the legislature, you have the Senate and the House, and then each one has lots of members, and so the power is distributed and it's representative. But in the executive, you really have the president, and then you have this whole infrastructure that's under this one person.
Yeah.
Vice president. You have like all the departments and all of the agencies, and they've been growing, like massively for a long time. So then you'll have something like the State Department, which will be filled with career politicians that are involved with embassies and diplomacy and other things. Um, and they might be kind of like more with one party or more with the other, but they might not really even care about politics. It might be just their job. Or they might be in there and they care very much about politics, but they don't really care about the people that are being represented or even really Democrats or Republicans. They care about other things, whatever the other things are.
Right.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, that's all a problem. And to the extent that that's a problem, it doesn't get addressed directly by elections themselves or like personalities. Like, why won't Biden or why won't Trump do X? You know?
Yeah. We have
So
a legal framework set up to not allow certain people to do certain things that seem logical.
yeah. And I think so. And to me, the main way that this was to some extent anticipated by at the founding. And so I think it's really interesting to look at, like, I mean, like if you look at the Bill of Rights, that was basically the state said, look, we're not gonna sign on to this unless we get these things. Like that's part of our deal. And there's a whole history to that, why
Yeah.
it was the Second Continental Congress and not the first, but they get it done. And so the first is the Bill of Rights. And then what we've been talking about, or I've been thinking about a lot, is freedom of the press. But there's other ones too, like, the rights that aren't that, like the rights that the federal government, only has the rights that we give them. This is the states speaking, back then they're like, look, all right, we'll do this United States thing, but you can only do what we say you can do. And all the other stuff
Yeah.
goes to the states and to the people. And that's the Ninth and the 10th Amendments that don't get talked about very much, but those are really important. They were important to the people who put it in, because you see what they're trying to do. They're like trying to limit the power. They're trying to, you know, spread it out over branches, have checks and balances. But even more than that, they're trying to like just give the minimum that the federal government needs to do the stuff that it needs to do, which was
Yeah.
important. Because if it wasn't important at all, they just would have not done it in the first place. I mean,
They even made a statement for that too, though. You were talking about Amendment 10. It says the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the state respectively, or to the people.
right.
So if they didn't talk about it, it doesn't mean it's illegal and we can throw you in jail. It means it's either the right of the state or the right of the people to.
Yeah, and then even more generally, it flows from a philosophy that says, who decides and who, what's even like what's the proper unit of to start with. So, like in this case, it's the individual person, and the individual person has rights, and then those rights are, you know, not seated, but are like we come together and agree that we're going to abide in certain ways and by certain things. But basically, the rights don't come from the government to the people. They start with the individual people and who agree to organize governments in certain ways. And
And
so,
trust the government to do that for us. That's what we're
well,
giving the government our trust to do something.
yeah, but even that, I mean, I'm not sure there was ever a government form that was more distrustful of the thing that they were creating. Because I mean, it's like in the whole thing, it's like
That's
we
why
don't we
yeah.
don't trust you. We're coming to this as reluctantly as possible. We came over here because we didn't like what they were doing in England or whatever. I mean, I guess a lot of them came here just as, colonists. But I mean, whether they started that way or they got to that point, they were not down with the program and they wanted to do things their own way. And so, yeah, I would say like, no, it's a lot of distrust. Like we don't trust you at all. So you're going to only do the things that we say and we keep all the other rights. And we also have guns, and we can also say whatever fuck we want, and so we really don't trust you at all. I mean, don't even like you,
Exactly.
but we
Well,
understand that we
yeah.
have to deal with you. And so, yeah,
Well, right there's an interesting spot too, because you talk about, we can say whatever the fuck we want. That's freedom of speech. That's number one here. But the press
right.
says whatever they want in terms of propaganda, which I think is wasn't that another amendment that was made in the 30s or something about the government cannot use propaganda against you, the Smith-Mundt Act? I guess it was an amendment. It was an act.
Yeah,
But then Obama threw that out, and now they can
right.
use government propaganda against us digitally too.
Yeah, that's not good.
And so
It's
it
not
used
good.
to be, we elect you, we wrote this, we want free speech, we agree to these rights and things and stuff. And then it turned into this governing body is in control of everything that does everything for every one of us, and they can do whatever they want to us. And we're not even allowed to sue them. We have to have permission to sue them. So I think things have been a little misconstrued since the beginning,
Well,
you know.
I mean, yeah, I mean, but I mean, it really depends on how you look at things. Like, well, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, I think it's actually exactly right. But I do think there's like you can stand in different places and look at it. So like if you just by like the language you were using, it's sort of like it's still like they're doing these things and I mean, it's like if you think about it from the perspective of the rights are mine, it doesn't really change what's going on. I mean, the problem is the same, but like to me anyway, it looks like, well, to the extent that that's true, and it is true, then it's to the people to do something about it, right? Because you're
How?
basically,
That's amendment number 2.
well, well, yeah, except for,
Right of the people shall not be infringed, but necessary to secure a free state.
no, I know
There
what
was
it
an
says.
and there
It's
was
just,
another spot in there that says something. Where is it? It's another spot that says to protect against a tyrannical government.
well, yeah, which is what we have.
Right.
Uh, and so then what do you do? I mean, and then what do you do gets to be difficult when, I mean, I felt like for some time that if just 1% of the people were really awake to what's going on, then things could be solved. And when I've
Right.
talked to people, like people who are serious, there aren't that many serious people, but when I've talked to serious people about it, and kind of like run that idea by, the reaction I tend to get is like that. What do you mean 1%? Like, don't you need 50 or at least 20 or 10? But my thinking is, if you just you just need like enough people to be kind of like awake, like free from the propaganda, to like make it enough to where like the next level and then the next level after that get it. And then it's like, the Berlin Wall, it falls. And it's not a perfect analogy, but I think it's a pretty good one. It's standing there. It's like it seems like there's nothing you can do about it. Every once in a while, someone would try to escape, to freedom, to relative freedom, and they'd get shot or something. I mean, it was just like like you can't do it. But then there got to be a point where there was enough of an awareness and kind of like-mindedness to where it just ends. I mean, I know that there's more to it than that, but this thing that stood for decades falls.
Right. I think that might be where we're getting to, is the thing is going to fall, but we all have to make it through that point, and they're making it really, really hard to make it
It's not
through.
gonna, but it doesn't fall on its own, even if it
No, it
looks,
falls with us
even
all
if it,
standing up doing something.
on the other side of it, it ends up feeling like it was inevitable, but it's not inevitable, but it is if people agree. So the people always have the power. I mean, anything that enough people agree on will be what happens. And then that's where I just feel like people are not awake. That's almost like why I would rather have people like adamant, like just since we've been talking so much about Bryce Taylor and her book, like I'd rather have people adamant that she is wrong, that she's lying or she's mistaken, that it's impossibly ridiculous and it cannot be believed, but to be engaged in the conversation, because then there's something to talk about. Like, okay, it is hard to believe. Those are, talking about the Dodgers. Okay, seriously, that was what was going on. Meantime, they're like playing and they're winning
Right.
games and losing games, and tens of thousands of people are going to the games, and it's on TV and it's here and there. And I'm to believe, like, underneath it all, this is happening. That's hard to believe. Like,
Yeah.
I would love for somebody to come with that kind of approach, because like sincerely, because I think that would be a sincere approach. But we don't get that. We get nobody's paying attention. Like, one of the things, there'll be people talking about like, well, I remember, I think when, 30 years ago, maybe I was up by Stanford or something, maybe, and I think something happened, but I'm not sure. And to the extent that that's someone's experience, I think it's worth hearing. But we'll give like a lot of attention to that, but not like these original whistleblowers. And this includes Kathy O'Brien and some others as well, who
Yeah,
put
absolutely.
in, who like went and tried to figure out, they basically said, even Penny Shepherd is like this to some extent. But people who go, what happened in my life? I would like
Hmm.
to know what happened. I mean, I have like information. I've been places. There's documents that show I was married. I was divorced. I lived here. I lived there. I went to school. I had parents, but there's a lot missing. But I remember stuff, and I'm trying to put it together. And then they do it, and they write about it, and they talk about it. Like, how are we not talking about that? But then we'll talk about, things that are like much more limited or well documented. So I'm not sure exactly how I got on that tangent, but but at least part of the point being, I feel like a big part of the solution, for like walls to fall down, is to have the conversations, not necessarily win arguments or put together a perfect documentary or article or something. It's like, we're not even having the conversation.
Right.
A
We
lot
have
of
to
people,
have it.
not in like the big, you and I are having the conversation, but we're not, as a country or as a part, a large interested group of it, talking about it. So did you see
That's
what
a good
I
point.
wrote I've been writing a lot about Bryce Taylor, obviously, but did you see what I posted something yesterday about how, like, why not submit Bryce Taylor's book as
Yeah,
in evidence?
I
I
agree.
mean, I'm serious about that.
No, I agree with
And I
you.
mean, submit Kathy O'Brien's book too, but why not submit these things in evidence?
Well, and Allie Carter's given testimony. Why can't we
Well,
submit these, situations into
well, that's
the
part of where yeah, no, that's part of where I'm getting, because I mean, exactly, right? I
Well, when you
mean,
talk about you said, and I think you said this very well the other day, and I'm not gonna, but you talked about the decades, right? So we know that
mhm,
MK Ultra had specific decades that they were doing certain topics, and then they did something else, and then they did something else, and we're told that none of it ever happened. Well, you've got a whistleblower from pretty much every decade in the same region of California discussing
right.
pretty much the same exact abuse, and none of them knew each other until I mean, I don't think any of them actually know each other except Kathy and Bryce. So the story, the idea that somebody can either be in or taken to the same exact location, have the same exact discussion of abuse, corruption, all kinds of issue,
Hmm.
60 years, 50 years in play, that's happening in the same region, and nothing has come out of that, that's in terms of justice, nothing has come out of that, and we still have some of the same players running today for government, not that he did something, I'm just saying he was there. So,
Hmm.
like, I don't that's the part I don't understand if it's not a big collusion cover up story, because you've got
Right.
decades. This person was then, this person was then. You've got, like, it never stopped, and they showcased this. So can
Hmm.
we enter those into discussion in the MK Ultra hearing so that we can be like, well, Bryce Taylor said this, and then Kathy said this, and then Allie said this. That's interesting because this person then went on to do these things. I mean, we could talk about Kissinger all day. We could talk about Reagan. We could talk about Uncle Jerry Ford. We could talk about all kinds of different stuff. And they were all very important in our, you know, government, in our country, in the history of who we are as a society, right? So can we talk about all the other things that people say about those people? Or is that just, we
Yeah,
shouldn't
no,
bring that up?
no, I think we should, because they talk about the same people. Again, even if you're like extremely dubious and skeptical, like you're like, that didn't happen, no way, no way. Like,
Right.
again, like I could see somebody saying, look, I mean, most people will have affinity for one political party and not the other. So, they'll be like, for some of them, they won't like them anyway. Like, so,
Right.
if they're a
Yeah.
Democrat, they might be saying, like, yeah, I'm willing to go with you on Reagan or Kissinger or Bush or whatever. Yeah, they're bad guys. Yeah, they're bad guys, or like, the same will be true in the opposite way for the other party. But none of them, I think, or very few people will want to go and say, even if they have a bad view of these people, they don't want to go and like look at like this salacious, like just perfectly awful stuff, especially if it involves children. And it's really easy to be like, well, that's preposterous. I don't believe it. And so, like, to get from that to like, let's look at it would be a really big step. And even as part of that could be like, okay, you don't believe it. You think that's all preposterous. There's no way that happened. You know, fair enough. Like, how could somebody do and experience all of that? Then, even still, then we know that there's these programs. We know that there's these presidents. We know that there's these children. So, why are they talking about it? Like, how do you explain that? Why are they talking about the same things?
Yeah.
Because because there's a reason for it, whatever it is, even if it's they're making it up. Well, why are they making that up and not something else? And why is it,
Right.
consistent? And then why does it check out so well in history? What's really going on? I mean, who's making them think that these presidents and other people are doing all this stuff? I mean, you know what I mean? I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
is it university professors and psychologists and these, scientists and madmen, and they're doing all this stuff, and then they're making them think that presidents are doing stuff that they're not? I mean, whatever it is, I mean, let's talk about it.
Yeah, that would be, yeah, I mean, that's the piece. Like, we just keep climbing the ladder of, if we can't talk about that, then it must be these people. If we can't talk about that, then it must be these people. And
Yeah.
it's gonna get, closer and closer to the top of, you know, who's controlling the things. But
Yeah, I mean, like, what the heck? I mean, how's this book there?
right.
How's this book there? And that says what it says. Man, I get these notifications are annoying. Sorry, figuring out. figuring out stuff. But like yeah, I mean, how is it? I mean, they're making it up. Well, why are they making that up? How are they making it up? Why is it consistent? How does it check out? Who's behind this all?
But
Who
we don't have the
stands to
ability to
benefit
do that.
from
We
it?
saw how they deposed Clinton and Wexner. So, I mean, we can't really have a true conversation about these things because we take them seriously when they say, I don't recall. And
Well,
that's the
yeah,
legal
but I mean,
framework.
right. But I mean, that's sort of like, okay. I mean, if you take it like this, it's like, well, I'm going to use Bryce Taylor as like the starting point. So she writes a book, and then it's like, well, how can we do anything? Because so like the House of Representatives, is subpoenaing and eventually like, oh, look at that. They're asking people to testify. They finally drag them there and ask them questions. So like the Clintons or Les Wexner or whoever, and then nothing happens. But I mean, all of that is like we're sitting here going, okay, we're Americans with rights, and there's people that represent us or that are in charge otherwise in some ways. And then they're doing this stuff, but they're not doing what we want them to do. And they're not getting at the problem or the truth of the matter. And so and so it's frustrating and there's nothing you can do, which is, I mean, I think that's a valid way of looking at it. I mean, it's actually what's going on. But if you really wanted to solve the puzzle or, figure something out, I mean, so then it's like, okay, well, then what do you do? You know? And I mean, I think what we're doing right now is like a step in that direction. It's a small one, but it's what's available to us. Like read the book, ask questions about it, think about it. I mean, as opposed to, what? I mean, just accepting it. That's just the way that it is. There's nothing you can
Right.
do about it. So anyway, that's kind of like how I get like how I think about it, like in a really general way. But that's not the same as actually doing anything about it, but it's at least a step and it's something I could do. I mean, I feel like if enough people were doing what we're doing and talking about, then we would be getting much, much closer to progress. And I mean, I do actually think there's a lot to be hopeful about. We're talking about things in ways that we weren't before. I mean, I think if they try to run, if we come to where there's like a new COVID thing, they couldn't run it the same way as before. You can get over on people the same way. With like
Right.
hysteria on cable news and like charts and maps and people, breathlessly talking about where it was or where it's coming next and all of that. I mean, I think that could be done or a version of it could be done, but there's going to be people that are there's going to be a lot more people that are going to be skeptical right from the jump and be like, wait a minute. I think actually, I'm not sure. I think my sense is that that's true. I mean, what do you
Yeah.
think about it?
I
I
think
mean,
it's true.
that it would be harder to pull that off the same way?
Yeah.
And I mean,
But
even pull that off. I mean, there are people who have different ideas about like whether even COVID was real or to the extent that it was or where it came from. But I mean, regardless, even what you think about that, I mean, the way that it was sold with a lot of fear and
they're
just
trying again.
they might be trying again. But I mean, I think even people who believe something that's more like, people who are still getting their booster shots, put it that way. I mean, which to me is like insane, but people who are still going and getting government stuff shot into their body called a booster shot,
I never
even
even
they,
put together that there's still people that dumb. That would be horrific. And I know there's a lot of them. That's problematic.
yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, if not, it was up until very recently, still wearing masks.
Well, they are
Outs.
again, yeah. And they're talking
So
about what are we gonna do? Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah,
yeah.
I just didn't
Yeah.
think
So,
about it in a
but I'm
while.
saying even people like that, I think can recognize that
Yeah.
or could be shown like old video, like from early 2020, of like CNN or Fox News or something. They'd be like, yeah, man, it's going to look super weird if you look back at it. That's kind of why I'm thinking,
Yeah.
maybe we're farther along, but they're
Yeah,
farther
they wouldn't be
along
able to do
too.
it the same way.
They're farther along too. So,
Yeah, they've been watching the disclosure movement and how people have discussed what happens and how this happens and why this happens and what they're feeling after that happens. And when they turn this thing
Hmm.
up, they figure out how that happens. So now, no, I don't think they'd be able to do things the same way. But I don't think if we have a mass discussion where you're talking about the 1%, I don't think like it won't take a lot of people, but we have to be a lot louder than we are now. It's one thing that they're talking about it in Congress. It makes me wonder what's going to happen in
Hmm.
10 years because that happened quickly, right? So if they are talking about it, then we are seeing good trends because things are picking up quickly and they're going. So maybe this is a good thing and I need to not be so like negative that nothing can ever change because it hasn't changed. Because
Right.
maybe it's a great thing that when Oliver North and all that stuff was happening, they were not discussing MK Ultra like they are now. I mean, they had the 70s hearing on MK Ultra, and then from my understanding, it was a conspiracy after that. And so maybe it's a good thing that it is trending right now as much as it is, even if we know that they're gonna control the disclosure movement, because what you're talking about is it's making a way so that new people's new information, new stuff that they learn, they can't, if we're actually listening, they can't do it to us again because we paid attention this time. So
Hmm.
hopefully, that would be at least a benefit to this. If we can't get justice, we can at least be like, absolutely not. I think there's a lot more people when this hantavirus comes up are going to be like, I'm not putting a mask on than would have ever said that publicly 6 years ago. So
Right.
we're somewhere different, at least. There's a lot more people that know that Zoom meetings can be professional and it's not, a disgusting way of cooperating with business like they did in 2019. You offered to have a Zoom meeting in a professional setting and they
Yeah.
laughed at you, but in 2020, it's the way of the world. So things are
Yep.
definitely changing and changing quickly.
Yeah.
Maybe if we have a lot of, maybe if we have a lot of conversations like this, we have a lot of positive perspective, thinking that some people are not controlled and maybe we'll plant the right seeds and those seeds will grow into justice trees. I don't know. We can have as much, faith as we want to. And I know God can move mountains. So I'm not saying that nothing can happen.
Hmm.
I'm not seeing it from the past. And it's really frustrating when you don't see it from the past. You see these names, you see George, Gerald Ford, you see Bill Clinton's name, Henry Kissinger, and all these people's names. And then, the new generations aren't even learning about them in school. So not only are they not going to know what happened, but they're not going to know that person's name existed, which means this stuff could keep happening. That's where I think conversations, we have to talk about it at least,
Yeah.
because then maybe one or two people will know it happened and they'll talk to somebody else, I mean,
Well, yeah, because so like just here in Southern California, and thinking of Bryce Taylor and some of those names and politicians from the past,
yeah.
there were other things going on too. Like, so there's LAPD, and then there was also what Gary Webb wrote about in Dark Alliance, which had to do with Iran Contra and Oliver North and that whole thing, where, we find out that government was, selling guns and importing drugs and then using money from that to, from South America, and then using money from that to, to fund, the operations in Iran and different things. And then the drugs themselves were being sold in America, to kids, but most infamously in the inner city of Los Angeles in the form of crack cocaine, which had the consequence of just destroying like thousands and thousands and thousands of families and lives, caused
Well, then
all
Reagan
kinds
came
of
in and put
problems.
mandatory minimums in. So he made it a federal offense to have crack cocaine on you or be serving it or delivering it or whatever, and then mandatory minimum sentences. And
Right.
then,
Well, they did three strikes laws in California. I don't know. They probably did that other places too.
I know
He
if it was
ended
a federal offense during the drug war that he instituted, they took out probation and parole in the federal system. So they brought the drugs in, they got people attached to them, then they charged them with federal cases because they were going across state borders or whatever. They threw them
right,
in jail for a mandatory 20 years or 10 years or whatever the long-term sentence was, and then, didn't
right.
clean up the whole system. They just made a lot of money off of all that.
Yeah, a lot of money and caused all kinds of problems. And then you also have, Nancy Reagan saying just say no on
Yeah, like the
popular
DARE
TV
program
shows
at the
and
same
stuff
time
everywhere.
frame in her,
Well, I
and
was
yeah.
going to say that. Then you have the DARE program, which came out of LAPD. And so, so this is from the 70s. Then the Reagan presidency is really the 80s.
Yeah.
Then the first Bush follows that, former CIA director.
He's totally named in a lot of these stories
Totally
too.
named. Right. And then from him is Clinton, and then forward, as you step through it. So there's a through line that's not even that hard to really see. And then that's just one example. Like if you went talk about Los Angeles, Bryce Taylor, Nixon, Reagan, because Nixon and Reagan are California
Yeah.
politicians, Kissinger, things that are going on, Iran-Contra, crack cocaine, Los Angeles, LAPD, which is its own thing, and how it connects to the present day. So it's not like, well, that was the past, and we're not talking about that anymore. We're talking about the present. It's like, well, it's all kind of connected. And if you understand it, even in a basic way, like I don't know everything about it, I know a lot about it. But if you understand it just kind of in a basic way, it'll help make sense of things. And you make sense of things and
Yeah.
make sense of like what to talk and think about, like what questions to ask. So, yesterday there were supposed to be MK Ultra hearings, which were canceled, but, we're still talking about it. And these things all kind of connect to each other. So I think to just say, okay,
Yeah.
well, that happened. Now let's talk about things. It's like, well,
But
that's
it
kind of
didn't
how
happen
we
that
got here.
long ago. That is how we got here. And you're right, exactly. Because, like, so let's think about Nancy Pelosi was alive when the dinosaurs was alive. So she was basically in Congress when a lot of these things were, I don't know if I want to say starting, but I know she was in Congress when Biden came in for the first time in the 70s. So all of these
Yeah,
stories
they
that
go way
came
back.
through,
Right.
and you've got Kennedy's named in Bryce Taylor's book. Kissinger, you were talking about all the California guys. We've got a
Right.
Kennedy in office now who's talking about the collusion that happened to his father and his uncle, and uncovering the CIA stuff that happened in his family. And I mean, I don't know if he's good or bad, but he's in charge today. So we can say it's of the, like you mentioned, it's in the history. So that was in the past. It's not really in the past in terms of the world and the 50 billion years or however old the world is. This was 60 years ago. So, and these people are still in
Yeah.
charge, and they're strings that they put in place, or some of the NDAs or the orders of protection, like we can't unseal these records until 80 years. Like some of that stuff is
Mhm.
still in place on what these things were talking about.
Right.
So it's not
Yeah.
super history. And it's
No.
and if that's the debate that people want to look at, well, that was in the past. Then why do we teach history in school, college, like all the way up? Why do people have historical degrees if history isn't important? If we shouldn't look at
Right.
history and learn from it? So,
Right.
like, we're not necessarily operating on all of the dots here, because if it's science, I'm not allowed to look at that because that's the narrative. If it's, history, I'm not allowed to look at that because that's history. So it
Right.
just, we should be able to have these conversations, and we should be able to be like,
Yeah.
but you have these conversations in a professional because that's your job. Why
Yeah.
can't I have this conversation with you as a professional because this is
Right.
your field,
Yeah,
you
I
know?
actually I think it's more important, or it's like prerequisite. So I think a lot of times, like the engagement is sort of like, depending on where you're coming from, like what the problem is, and then to argue about it. So if you're more of a conservative or a libertarian, you might, I mean, to the extent that those words even mean things anymore. But, if you're critical of, like, say, bigger government, and you're more in favor of smaller government and more like personal and family autonomy, say, then,
Yeah,
then you have a lot to say about things right now and argue about. You probably think the schools are bad, so you're for homeschooling, or at least the right to do so, et cetera, et cetera. But then there'll be
right.
people also people who are at No King's protests. They feel like we need to organize. The 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 current president is like really bad guy. He's a dictator. He's a fascist, and so that they'll be arguing from a very different perspective. But they'll also be arguing like, I'm right and the world is screwed up because there's too many, whatever, truck driving, gun toting rednecks. And so you have like, however, you have all these people, but they're arguing, but they're not having any conversations with each other. Like there isn't really an effort on the like small government side to explain why, where they're coming from. And there isn't really there definitely isn't on the other side. It's like,
Right.
pitchforks and like, let's go and, off with their head kind of thing.
But
But
that shows to me the MK Ultra because then those same exact people were yay King Charles 3 weeks later.
yeah, well,
So
but yeah, I mean, if I'm trying to like say that there's, like the idea MK Ultra is still going on or that kind of thing.
a
If
good
it's still
example, yeah.
going on and I want it to still go on, then this
Yeah,
works pretty well for me. I can't
right.
convince all of these people that it's not going. I can't win the fight. I can't win the argument. I'm just, a handful of people. I mean, I have like all the resources and everything, but it's still, there's still so many of them. you know, like there's only like, say, a handful of us and we're running everything. And since we're running it, we can do whatever we want. But man, there's a lot of them. So we better make sure we don't like screw up. So if they all decide they're
Yeah,
against us, we're in trouble. So for me, I would rather have it like the way that it is perfect. Like I need about half the people on the no king side. I need about half the people who think that's ridiculous and the problem. And I need them
just
to
wash it all together.
like kind of argue about it, but not really with themselves, more like just preach to their own choirs and get
Yeah,
everybody all upset about it. And if we have to, we'll just do a civil war or something. But the last thing we're going to do
that's what
is
they're
have
pushing. That's what it seems like they're pushing.
yeah, because they're not going to fight. I mean, it's not no sweat off their
No, they're gonna
back.
have
I
us
mean,
fight each other.
then it's just interesting in a different way.
Yeah,
So, but see what they don't want to have is the conversation. They don't want They don't want the gun-toting rednecks talking to the No Kings protesters about
right.
all the things that they have in common.
Yeah,
Because if they like said, okay,
exactly.
there's
There it is.
things we disagree about. Let's talk about what we agree. Do you love children?
Yeah,
Most of them will say,
yeah,
yeah, of course. Do you want them to have a bad future or a good future? I want them to have a good future. Not just your kids, every kid. Be like, well, especially my kids, but yeah, of course, all kids. And you're like, oh, okay, well, you'll find out that
we all
people are
agree
pretty
pretty much
much
the same.
in agreement, even though you're looking at things differently. And probably
Or being
if
labeled differently.
if an honest conversation's being had, they're probably changing minds a little bit. Like they're like, yeah, you know what, I see where you're coming from a little bit better, and vice versa. And then what you'll end up with is like 99.9% of the people that are pretty down with each other, looking at like these fuckers that are doing everything.
Yeah,
And if I'm one of the
agreed.
guys doing everything, that's what I want to avoid. So then what do? I isolate people. Like in a small way, in a limited way, I think that's what's behind like the resistance I get, where I get blocked by people who should be my allies, where I get defamed by people who, like if you take them at their word, their mission is completely consistent with what I'm doing.
Right.
No, that's just in a small way, but I feel like it's commensurate with the amount of, like the waves I'm able to make. If I made huge waves, I think I'd be getting huge blowback. If I make some waves, then maybe I get a little bit. I think if people could just
Yeah,
ignore me entirely, they would just, I mean, I'm talking about people in charge, people running stuff. If they
they
could
clearly can't.
if they
They
could just
clearly can't.
yeah, if they could just ignore me, they would. I mean, or a better example is Allie Carter, actually. If people could just ignore her and Shelley, they would just do that. There would be no smear campaign. There'd be nothing. But they can't ignore her, so she's a problem. Because how do you discredit someone who's basically saying, it's a miracle I'm alive. I promised myself and the people that I was with that I would talk and I wouldn't stop talking. I believe I have a personal relationship with Jesus. I feel like I'm saved, and I'm going to talk about what happened. And I'm going to try,
Exactly.
I'm not going to stop trying to do it until it takes hold. Well, shoot, somebody like that, that's a huge problem, because what are you going to do? I mean, at this point, if anything were to happen to her, that's super bad, because everyone's going to go, nope, that doesn't make sense. She was good. She was happy. She was healthy. She was talking the whole time.
Yeah.
And she's got insurance holders. So if you believe she has receipts, there's receipts. And then what do? You try to discredit her, but even that's almost impossible. I mean, I don't even think
Yeah.
I think the smear campaign that was aggressive, and it might have been trying to trigger things, but it was not persuasive to normal people. If
Definitely
anything,
not
it's like, what the
persuasive
hell was that?
in terms of
Um,
anything other than this is drama. Like
is
that
she?
will throw a lot of people.
Mhm.
A lot of people can't handle a single ounce of drama, so they'll read news and they'll read posts and stuff, or they'll watch something, but they don't want the back and forth bitter bickering. And the smear campaign brought a lot of that on their own side that Allie never participated in, that caused a lot of people to be like asking questions the wrong direction. And it's contrived
Yeah.
1,000%. And if you're not in the know of how a targeted harassment campaign is set up, which is very similar to a marketing campaign for I'm going to launch this new product.
That's so interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. If you're not aware of how that works, it's just going to look like a post, some words, some things. And when you start to see the drama,
Right.
half the people are going to turn it off because I don't care. I don't pay attention to it. That's why I don't watch the news. And so a lot of smear campaigns, smear situations, a lot of those are not about truth. They're not about anything that's actually important to the public. It's not about getting, it's just about watering down the public's attention span.
Right.
And that's the frustrating part because it's literal stuff that's hurting the survivor. It's literal stuff that is like pinging the survivor's, vulnerable spots on purpose. But
Hmm.
the general public is just getting desensitized. And it's just, and that's the way that the SEO campaign will work because they'll, it existed, you can search for it, but 30,000 things pop up first. It must not be true because if it was true, it would come up first, right? So then you move on.
Hmm.
And so it's the same concept of, I think this is an MK Ultra thing and it shows is like, I can control your brain by saying this did or didn't happen, by putting something else in front of you, by shiny objects. I can do all of these marketing techniques,
Right.
against your truth because I'm afraid of your truth. And
Right.
and the general public isn't trained to not fall for a commercial or a article or a campaign. They are trained to fall for all of that so they'll buy the product. And here the product is don't trust the survivors. The government is your safety net. And that product is false. That's false advertising. That's a crime against humanity to push that product. And,
Right.
I think it's very interesting how much marketing aligns with the smear campaign schematic, I
Yeah.
guess, setup.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, it's all like psychology and
Hmm.
influence and, even motivation, manipulation, trying to get people to do things they wouldn't otherwise do or think about
Yeah,
things in a certain way or, you know,
exactly.
whatever it is.
Yeah.
But I've kind of I've moved a lot back from the idea that if I could, there would be something like if I could just explain things in a certain way, if I could just write it up perfectly, if I could make a video that was like so compelling, then, it would persuade people in ways where they would just have to come around to my way of thinking. I don't really think that so much anymore. I think more, and it's because I agree with you. I think that it's that powerful and people are under the thrall of that kind of messaging and marketing. And then so it becomes something that's more like I'm documenting stuff. And I tend to do it publicly on X, but a lot of times I'm just documenting what's going on and getting a timestamp for it and then trying to do things in reality. So like for
Yeah.
in reality in California right now, so and maybe kind of to put some things together in like a summary kind of way is that I look at like we've been talking about Allie Carter and she's from
Yeah.
Riverside County. So she was born in San Bernardino and then mainly and then grew up in the Inland Empire. So like with her biological family and with a lot of problems, and then in government CPS care with a lot of problems, maybe more, before finally escaping, kind of. I mean, she's never really been free of it. But anyway, it's in the place where the leading Republican candidate for governor was sheriff, so in charge of law enforcement. I mean, since 2018 he has been,
Since
but
she
he's
was
had an
born, he
entire
was in office.
he had an entire career. And so, I mean, I've had a little bit of people pushing back on me that goes something like, yeah, but he wasn't in charge of everything, and he wasn't necessarily doing anything to her, and he was trying to reform things, and he just
Then he
whatever.
should
I
talk
mean,
about her.
he should exactly. So if he's a good guy and he was there the whole time and he wasn't in charge of stuff like he is now, and he knows what he knows, and he's the person of all the people here, he's the person that should be in charge of 40 million people in California. He should talk about it, even if talking about it means like, yeah, that's horrific. That could have happened in other counties too. We're dealing with it. I was trying to deal with that kind of thing. Here's where we were successful. These are the problems we have. Here's where I was thwarted, or we were
Yeah.
thwarted, or my predecessor was, but we don't get any of that. It's just like, no, I'm not going to talk about it. And then, so she and I were both born at the same hospital. I'm much older than she is, but I know a lot of the same places, had mostly different experiences. But I find myself at UC Irvine, and, in the situations I'm in, which I didn't experience the horrific things that she did. I experienced what I experienced. But I have come up against a lot of corruption and a lot of things that are not right, that I did not expect to encounter. And it happens to be with or connected to or right next door to some people with lots and lots of resources, responsibilities, power, etc. And then one of them is Katie Porter. I mean, it's really just one of them. And so she's a politician, and then she's running for office. Well, she's like the leading Democrat, or at least one of them, for the same thing that sheriff is on the red team. And then the two of us together, I think if you put both of those stories together, that tells a whole lot about what's going on. And if it doesn't say a whole lot in terms of ultimate answers, it 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 raises lots and lots of questions, like good questions. How is this happening? Is it any better now in Riverside County than it was? Is it widespread? Is it in all the counties? Is it across the nation? If it is, how so? And then to me, the same kinds of questions. And maybe a few answers too. But even if there aren't a lot of answers, there's questions. But are those questions being asked? No, they're having debates. They're not even talking about trafficking. And if they do
Right.
talk about it, they're not talking about it in real ways. They're talking about it in traditional, superficial ways. Like, we need more cops, or we have this special program, or we're doing, we got this funding from a grant, or we're going to train to do this, but I mean, if you've been around for a while, that's just the way it goes. I mean, they're always talking about stuff, but they're not really, it's not even being engaged yet in like the debate. And so for me, it's like, if I can't get it in the conversation that way, then I can't get it in the conversation. If I can't, like, just right around the corner from the candidate for governor and connected to this super high profile case,
Yeah.
I mean, where we're talking together, if you think about it, so I've never met her in person, but we're allied in this effort. She's a young Black woman who was trafficked as a child, and, through CPS and that kind of thing. And then
Yeah.
I'm a older white male who was married to a professor of education and raised 3 children, and ran into like the same systems, but kind of at the other end of it, where they're not trying to traffic me, obviously, but they're trying to steal my house and take my money, and I'm trying to protect my children and ultimately protect them from entering the same kind of system that Allie found herself in,
Yeah.
where no matter what happens, they're not going to have that kind of outcome. So I'm not trying to pretend that. I'm also not trying to take away anything from what Allie has to say. But ultimately, we're talking about the same system, the same counties, the same government, the same courts, same thing. And we're connected pretty closely to these two leading candidates, both parties, and
Yeah.
nobody will talk about it. I mean, it's not that they're not answering the question. They're not being asked the
Did you see
questions.
exactly, and when they are, it becomes a
Hmm.
problem. Did you see Audra Morgan address that
I
with
did. I did.
Yeah, he
And
got
isn't she,
mad.
yeah, and isn't she awesome?
She's amazing. It reminded me of, she's absolutely amazing. So,
Hmm.
like, the balls that she has to do what
Right.
she does is amazing. And so, like, it was just awesome that she confronted him on it, and then he immediately got angry. "You're accusing me?" And
But
that was so interesting Oh, go ahead. What?
I was just going to say, did you know that like some time ago, and I'm not sure how far in the past, but she actually had interviewed him?
No. I have to go watch it.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll bet she posts it or I can find it
Okay.
somewhere because I don't know if you've seen it, but so she's, at public meetings, so like board meetings and other like city and county meetings. She's also at protests, sometimes kind of organizing them, sometimes covering them.
Wow.
But she also has interviewed people over time. I mean, I don't know how much it's a part of what she's done, but it's a part of her body of work and it will be on her, on her X account. And she also has Telegram. She's prolific. She does a lot of stuff. But one of them is she had an interview with him and it was a while ago. So it was before she has this history. So it was not a hostile interview. He was invited and was talking about, I think, his probably candidacy for sheriff because it's an elected position. And so she's asking him questions and he's answering them. So it's not like she already knew him. She didn't just like confront him completely out of the blue. I'm not sure to
Yeah,
what
no, I
extent
agree.
he remembered it, but he had at least a somewhat friendly interview from her. And she probably asked him, well, I know she would have asked him real and sincere questions, and she might have received them as, relatively sincere answers from a politician. But obviously, that's different now. But yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
part of what's amazing is how it stands out as such a unique and impressive thing. Because it is, but there was a time in the past that it wouldn't have been that unusual because you would think, oh, that's what journalists do. You
absolutely.
know, now it's like nobody does that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're right
Um,
on point. I love her account. I think it's fantastic, and I love what she did. So I'm gonna have to go back and watch that Riverside interview. It reminded me of in the roast that just published. I watched Cat Williams roast Kevin Hart.
oh, I didn't see that. How was that?
The roast was stupid, but Kevin Hart's was, or what you call it, Cat Williams was interesting because he was very public about how awful Kevin Hart was, and now he's getting paid to be on stage, like roasting him and then promoting how awesome he is.
Yeah.
And he said something that I thought applies here. He said, just because Kevin went to Diddy parties doesn't mean he did anything wrong.
Uh-huh.
It's the way he responds when you ask why he went to the Diddy parties that shows he did something wrong. And that's how I feel about the way she addressed with Chad Bianco, or Bianco, right?
Yeah.
Because
Right.
I think, it's one thing for you to be like, look, you've been in office all this time, all these things have happened, all this stuff. Can we address it? And he's like, well, let's talk about it. I did blah, 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 blah. But
Right.
he immediately, like, you're accusing me. So
Yeah.
that's a very interesting response.
It really is. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's exactly what I thought because you can look at it a number of ways. It could be an opportunity to talk about a really important issue that's
Yeah.
frustrating as somebody who's a sheriff trying to protect people. You'd be like, yeah,
Mhm.
man, I hear you.
Mhm. Mhm.
You
Conversations
know,
are key.
man.
They could have had a very important conversation. If he's not a bad dude, if he's the right dude for California because he can fix all that stuff, that would have been the exact moment to have that conversation to prove it.
Right. Or to even indicate it,
Try to.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, like like, what are you saying about my brother? He's awesome, man. He's a great judge. I've known him forever. I mean, what are you talking about?
Interesting. Yeah, we should definitely bring that up.
Yeah, I mean,
But
it's kind of weird. Like,
it
so
is.
before things broke, in our family, like if you'd asked me in 2012 about, like my ex-wife, Anne Marie, and what she was doing, she was in the classroom. I would have been like, somebody said like, yeah, what's she doing with kids or whatever, and teaching. I would have said, I mean, I wouldn't have been defensive like that. I would have said, oh yeah, it's, we're studying education and there's like some real problems at the school and we're excited about things that we found out and we're kind of approaching it in a different way. And that's what she's talking about. And if somebody said like, well, that sounds crazy, like, why are you doing that? Why aren't you just trying to get kids into the regular schools and make them as well, here's one. I mean, let's say like what, there's a real problem with people taking their kids out of the schools because the ones who can't take them out of the schools still have to go to the public schools and the public schools are bad. So therefore we should force everybody to send their kids to the public schools. It's not fair. But if somebody had
That's
said that, I
not a
wouldn't have
good
been
fight.
if somebody had said that, I wouldn't have been defensive about it. I would have said, well, I mean, it is a problem. We do need good schools, but, and it would have been an opportunity to talk about it and explain about it. It was super
Yeah, I
weird the
agree.
way that he responded. I think that was
Very
exactly what
rude.
I thought. I was like, man,
Yeah.
you were watching it, you were thinking like, well, maybe I didn't really think there was something to that, but now I do. Now I
Now I
do.
do.
Yeah,
Yeah, now I have questions.
right,
Now I have a
right.
lot of questions. So, yeah, kudos
Exactly.
to him for totally controlling that the opposite way with his emotional response. So,
Streisand effect.
give him a nice,
Yeah.
yeah, give him a
Wasn't
nice
thinking
pat on the
about
back
it, but
there.
now I am.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I'm gonna